In today's presentation, I will be detailing the learning theory of behaviourism. An important detail to remember in regards to behaviourism is that behaviourists are mostly concerned with changes in behaviour that can be measured and observed. Behaviourism is comprised of an extensive collection of teaching approaches, both positive and arguably negative, all of which have evolved over time through extensive research in which they were either perfected for classroom environments or abolished as they were ineffective or unethical. Not all behaviourist teaching approaches are effective in the long term and need modifying to keep up with changing circumstances in a classroom. I'll expand on this later. Behaviourists do not believe that processes internal to the learner, such as maturation or cognitive development, are responsible for their behaviour or what they learn. It is more likely that external influences are what inspire changes in behaviour and learning. There are several features of behaviourism that learning and behaviour can be attributed to. The first is contiguity. Contiguity is one of the simpler learning theories that comes under the branch of behaviourism. The idea of contiguity is that two events occurring frequently and at the same time will cause the learner to develop an association between them, and in future will only need to remember one of the events in order to trigger memory of the other. Generally, contiguity cannot adequately teach an individual, and more complex approaches are needed. Classical conditioning is one of the more complex features of behaviourism. With classical conditioning, a new stimulus is introduced in the hopes to condition an automated response. The most common example of this approach is Pavlov's dog, in which classical conditioning founder Ivan Petrovich Pavlov conditioned a dog to salivate in response to the sound of a tuning fork. Pavlov's experiment worked on creating a conditioned stimulus that would elicit a conditioned response. Another feature of behaviorism is operant conditioning. Operant conditioning uses positive and negative consequences to strengthen or weaken voluntary behavior. Conditioning and reinforcing a person's conscious behavior is something that takes specific approaches to achieve. E.L. Thorndike's trial and error learning theory explains that for good behaviors to be repeated, they should be responded to positively. Similarly, if negative behavior is followed by discomfort or annoyance, it is likely to not be repeated. Using this theory, behavior is shaped through a system of reward and punishment that seeks to abolish negative behavior by reinforcing more positive actions. The application of behavioral principles in the classroom is known as applied behavior analysis. Behavioral principles are used to change behavior that is socially important. This is most commonly applied when managing the behaviors of those with severe and disabling conditions. When reinforcing behavior, it is important to remember that not all reinforcers function the same for all individuals. What might be received positively by one student could elicit a negative response from another. For conditioning of behaviors that are not enjoyed, such as homework, Premack's principle is applied. This principle uses something that an individual enjoys to reinforce something less enjoyable, like using time on a gaming console as a reward for a child completing homework. Reinforcement can lose its effectiveness with being overly frequent. This is why reinforcement schedules are important. Intermittent reinforcement schedules can be implemented once the target behavior has been established. The schedule gradually reduces the rate at which rewards are given, avoiding satiation. An additional feature of behaviorism is planned ignoring. In planned ignoring, all forms of reinforcement are removed for unwanted behavior. Bad behavior is ignored and the focus is entirely on reinforcing good behavior. This encourages the student to behave in a manner that is rewarded and eventually leads to the extinction of bad behavior. Another method of abolishing unwanted behavior is known as punishment. Punishment as a teaching strategy is strongly criticized and largely seen as ineffective, as it provokes retaliation and does not allow students to learn more appropriate behavior. A key feature of behaviorism is teaching new skills. Teaching new and unfamiliar skills ensures that further learning occurs. Once a skill is learned, maintenance and generalization need to be practiced in order to ensure that what is taught is not forgotten. Maintenance involves intermittent checks which ensure that the skills learnt are durable and not lost through lack of practice and attention. The purpose of generalization is to ensure that students learn to respond to stimuli that are similar to, but not the same as those that previously triggered a response. All of these features of behaviorism contribute to what is still a widely practiced and effective theory of teaching. There are both strengths and weaknesses that divide opinions on whether or not behaviorism is actually effective. The fact that behaviourism focuses predominantly on observable behaviour is a strength, as it means that its effectiveness can be tested and measured, enabling psychologists to pinpoint its weaknesses and improve on them. Another strength of behaviourism is its ability to achieve and replicate successful responses to conditioning and reinforcement. Despite its effectiveness in classroom environments, it still receives significant criticism. The fact that it dehumanises the human condition is one of the most prominent weaknesses of behaviourism. Critics believe that behaviourist theories reduce human behaviour to simply being a collection of stimulus-response behaviours, and that they ignore the complex thought processes of humans. Behaviourism also raises a number of ethical questions, as it is known for its deliberate attempts to modify the behaviour of an individual. It is believed that modifying another person's behaviour undermines and denies the human their own personal agency and free will. Similarly, the infliction of discomfort on an individual to condition certain behaviour often raises questions as to whether or not behaviourism is an ethical learning theory. For me personally, I believe that behaviourism is quite an effective learning theory. I completely agree with conditioning and reinforcement of positive behaviours in a classroom environment and believe that when done right, amazing results can be achieved. In high school, I always found that teachers who positively reinforced their students came out with better results. In VCE, I spent a year in a classroom where, unlike several of my other teachers, no positive conditioning or reinforcement was used. The classroom environment was very uncomfortable and I really felt as though I was being encouraged or supported. Completing work felt like a chore rather than a process of learning. There was no praise or reward. My classmates were discouraged by this teacher's approach to learning, and I think that hindered our ability to achieve desired results. Comparing that class with classes that utilise behaviourist teaching theories and approaches makes it clear to me that behaviourism is quite important in structuring a positive learning environment. It ensures that students maintain an interest in learning and encourages them to continue achieving desired results. Overall, despite being criticised for its weaknesses, behaviourism and all its features are effective in a classroom environment. It doesn't dehumanise people, it simply encourages them to choose better behaviours that in the long run will benefit them infinitely more than if they weren't guided in a positive direction.